Have you ever noticed how the dark can change everything in an instant? A familiar room feels different, a quiet hallway feels longer, and an empty shadow can suddenly feel alive. That fear is older than civilization, older than myth, older than memory itself. For most of human history, darkness was not just the absence of light. It was a world where humans lost control. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, because tonight we're exploring why humans still fear the dark. The darkness comes long before the fear is understood. It spreads slowly across a landscape that has no lamps, no distant glow, no quiet hum of electricity pressing back against the night. The last light drains from the horizon, and what remains is not simply the absence of sight, but the arrival of something deeper, something older, something that once reshaped the behavior of every human being alive. In that world, the difference between day and night is not cosmetic, it is absolute. A valley that feels open and harmless in daylight becomes, within minutes, a maze of uncertain shapes. Trees collapse into silhouettes, distances shrink and distort. A familiar path dissolves into shadow, and the mind begins to supply what the eyes no longer can. The ground itself feels less certain, every step measured, every sound amplified. A branch snaps somewhere beyond the edge of vision, and it is no longer just a sound. It is a possibility, it is movement, it is intent. For most of human history, this transition happens every single day. There are no streetlights waiting to soften it, no glowing windows promising shelter nearby. Darkness is not something that fills a room. It is something that takes the world. What survives in the archaeological and anthropological record suggests that early humans organized their lives around this boundary. Movement slows or stops entirely. Groups cluster together. Open ground is avoided. Fire becomes not just warmth, but necessity. Even then, the circle of light is small, fragile, and constantly threatened by the vastness pressing in from all sides. And beyond that circle, the land does not sleep. It shifts. It listens. It hides. The fear that begins here is not irrational. It is not imagined. It is rooted in the simple fact that the human body is poorly adapted to darkness. Vision degrades quickly. Depth perception weakens. Color disappears. The eye becomes dependent on faint contrasts, on movement, on fragments of information that are easily misread. Scholars still debate exactly how early human sensory systems adapted to low-light conditions, but the evidence remains clear that compared to many predators, humans are at a disadvantage once the sun goes down. This disadvantage changes everything. In daylight, a human can see threats approaching, distance can be judged, escape routes can be chosen, cooperation is easier, but at night, those advantages collapse. The world becomes asymmetrical. The things that hunt can see better, hear better, move more quietly. The human body, stripped of its primary sense, must rely on guesswork. And guesswork, under pressure, tends toward caution. It tends toward fear. This is where the earliest layers of that fear begin to take shape, not as panic, but as a constant tension, a background awareness that something could be there, just beyond perception, something watching, something waiting. It does not need to be present to be effective. The mind fills the gap. Even today, in environments where no real danger exists, that mechanism still operates. A dark room can feel occupied. A quiet hallway can feel longer than it is. A shadow can take on form. then intention. Modern reasoning can override it, but not immediately and not completely. The reaction arrives first. Understanding comes after. That delay is important. It suggests that the fear of darkness is not built from conscious thought, but from deeper systems older, faster, and less precise. Systems designed not to be correct, but to be safe. In an environment where missing a real threat could mean death, it is better to assume danger where none exists than to ignore danger when it is real. So the darkness becomes crowded even when it is empty. It becomes populated by possibilities. Early humans do not describe this in written form, at least not in the beginning. There are no records of their first fears, no direct accounts of how they experience the night. But indirect evidence appears in behavior. Campsites cluster around sources of light. Movement patterns avoid certain times. Tools are shaped for close defense, not distant engagement. The structure of daily life itself bends around the cycle of light and dark. And gradually, something else begins to happen. The darkness is no longer just a physical condition. It becomes a place where different rules apply, a place where certainty dissolves, a place where the boundary between what is real and what is imagined becomes less stable. Over time, that instability begins to take on meaning. But at the beginning, it is simpler than that. A group gathers around a fire. The flames flicker, shifting shadows across faces, across the ground, across the surrounding trees. Beyond that narrow radius, there is nothing visible, only sound, only movement hinted at but not confirmed. The fire provides warmth, yes, but more importantly, it provides definition. Inside the light, things are known. Outside, they are not. This division is absolute, and it is fragile. The fire can die. The fuel can run out. The wind can shift. The light can fail. And when it does, the boundary disappears. The known world collapses into the unknown. There is no gradual transition, only a sudden loss. This is the condition under which the human fear of darkness forms not as a dramatic moment, but as a repeated experience, night after night, generation after generation, a pattern reinforced by survival, encoded not in stories at first, but in behavior, in instinct, in the quiet decisions made at the edge of a light. Over time, that pattern becomes expectation. Darkness means uncertainty. Uncertainty means risk. And risk, for early humans, is rarely abstract. It is immediate, physical, final. Even in places where no threat appears, the system remains active. It cannot afford to turn off. It cannot wait for confirmation. It operates continuously, scanning, predicting, imagining. The cost of a false alarm is small. The cost of silence, when danger is real, is not. So the mind begins to treat darkness itself as a signal. Not proof of danger, but a condition where danger is more likely. This is the foundation. Before myths, before spirits, before stories fill the night with meaning, there is a simple, persistent awareness that the world changes when the light is gone, and that in that change, humans are no longer in control. What comes later, beliefs, symbols, fears given names, all grows from this original imbalance. Because long before darkness becomes mysterious, it is already dangerous. And long before it is explained, it is already felt. What makes the night so effective is not that it creates danger from nothing, but that it restores the advantage to things that have always known how to use it. Long before cities glow through the dark and long before human beings learn to flood their surroundings with artificial light, the night belongs to other eyes, other ears, other bodies. Across the greater part of human history, sunset does not simply reduce visibility, it rearranges power. A human being is a competent animal by day. Upright posture offers reach and perspective. Hands can shape tools, carry weapons, gather fuel, protect children. Cooperation multiplies strength. In open light, a group of humans becomes difficult to surprise and even harder to intimidate. But these strengths depend on seeing clearly enough to use them. Once sight begins to fail, the balance changes at once. The senses that remain are useful, but not enough. Hearing can detect motion, but it rarely explains it. Smell may signal animal presence, but often too late. Touch can confirm a threat, but by then the moment for avoiding it may already be gone. For a great many predators, this problem barely exists. Their eyes draw in what little light remains. Their hearing isolates a movement in grass or brush. Their bodies are built for quiet approach, sudden speed, and efficient violence at close range. Big cats do not need a clear midday field. Hyenas do not need sunlight to test the weakness of a perimeter. Packs of wolves do not require a human to see them before they understand where the human stands. Venomous creatures need even less. A snake hidden under stone or leaf litter does not care whether the victim understands the landscape. It only requires proximity and one mistake. In that older world, the darkness becomes a medium through which danger travels more easily. A human camp may be visible from a distance because of its fire, its smell, its scraps of meat, its noise. The people within it can see very little by comparison. This is one of the crueler ironies of early survival. The same light that protects also announces. The same fire that keeps predators wary can also reveal precisely where vulnerable bodies are gathered, where the young are sleeping, where attention is focused and where it drifts. Scholars still debate how frequently early humans faced direct nocturnal predation compared with the long daylight pressures of hunting, scavenging, and exposure. The evidence remains incomplete, partly because fear leaves few fossils. Bones may show tooth marks. Campsites may show patterns of protection, but the emotional weight of repeated exposure to unseen threat is much harder to recover. Even so, what survives in the record suggests that night danger is not occasional background noise. It is part of the architecture of early human life. Predators are only one layer of the problem. Darkness is full of hazards that do not hunt, yet kill with the same indifference. Uneven ground disappears. Ravines become invisible. Loose stones, roots, and holes turn a simple path into a sequence of traps. A fall that might be minor in daylight can become disabling when far from shelter. Water is another danger. Rivers sound different at night. Shorelines vanish. Marshes, mud, sudden drop-offs, and cold depth all become harder to judge. In landscapes shaped by cliffs, caves, forest edges, or animal burrows, darkness multiplies the cost of ordinary movement. This matters because early humans cannot always remain still. Fuel must be maintained. Infants cry, animals circle, weather changes. Sometimes a group must move in darkness because staying put is more dangerous than travelling blind. In those moments, the fear is not theatrical. It is technical. It comes from knowing, perhaps from experience, that one hidden hazard is enough. There is also the pressure of uncertainty itself. An animal seen clearly can be assessed. Its size can be estimated. Its speed can be guessed. Distance creates time, and time allows decisions. In darkness, those intervals collapse. A sound nearby may come from something small or something lethal. Rustling leaves could mean wind. prey, or a predator testing the edge of a camp. A pair of reflected eyes may look close when they are distant, distant when they are close. The body responds before the mind has enough information to judge accurately. This response is not elegant, but it is useful. Muscles tighten, breathing changes, attention narrows, silence becomes deliberate. The entire organism shifts into a mode designed for immediate consequences. Modern neuroscience gives this process names, but the mechanism itself is far older than language. It is the body recognizing that clarity has been lost and compensating with readiness. False alarms are built into the system. They have to be, in a dangerous landscape. Hesitation is expensive. There is a lesser-known possibility that deepens the picture. Some researchers argue that part of human sociality may be sharpened by this repeated need to survive vulnerable hours together. The night may not only terrify, it may also bind. Fire circles encourage proximity. Vigil must be shared. Sleep becomes staggered. Someone listens while others close their eyes. Someone feeds the flames. Someone notices the sound that does not match the others. No single explanation fully accounts for the complexity of early human cooperation, but darkness almost certainly helps train it. A lone human in the night is exposed. A group, even a frightened one, creates more senses, more noise, more warning, and more chance of enduring until dawn. Yet group living does not erase fear. In some ways it can magnify it. Fear spreads quickly when information is poor. One person startles, and others react before knowing why. A shifting shadow at the edge of camp can send tension through everyone awake. A child's cry can sharpen adult vigilance at once. The unseen threat does not have to arrive, it only has to remain possible. This is one reason darkness is so effective as a source of fear. It allows imagination and danger to operate together, each strengthening the other. The fossil record offers rare and indirect glimpses of the stakes. Early humans bear injuries, healed fractures, bite marks, trauma that hints at dangerous animals and dangerous landscapes. Sites associated with cave occupation raise another question. Caves provide shelter, but they are not empty spaces waiting for human ownership. Many are already inhabited or intermittently used by bears, lions, hyenas, and other formidable animals. To enter such places, especially in low light, is to negotiate territory with creatures better designed for the environment than any human. The cave protects, but it also conceals. It is refuge and hazard at once. That pattern appears again and again in the human relationship with darkness. The places chosen for safety are never perfect. A rocky overhang keeps off rain, but blocks visibility. A thicket hides a camp, but also muffles approach. A fire offers reassurance, but limits night vision beyond its glow. Every solution introduces a fresh vulnerability. What survives in the record suggests that human beings are constantly trading one danger for another, trying not to remove risk entirely. Because that is impossible, but to place it in a form they can better endure. This older pressure leaves traces in the modern mind. Even people who know they are physically safe often describe the dark in the language of exposure. It feels as though something could approach unnoticed. It feels harder to judge space. It feels easier to be surprised. These reactions may no longer correspond to real predators waiting in the hallway or just beyond the bedroom door, but the structure of the fear remains recognizable. Darkness still implies that someone or something else may possess the advantage, and for most of the human story, that implication is true. Night does not have to contain a lion every evening to train a species into caution. It only has to contain enough consequences, often enough, over enough generations, for the nervous system to learn the pattern. The pattern is simple and merciless. When visibility falls, vulnerability rises. When vulnerability rises, suspicion becomes adaptive. When suspicion becomes adaptive, darkness itself acquires emotional force. By the time stories begin to gather around the night, the body already knows how to respond to it. It knows that the fireline matters. It knows that sound can arrive before form. It knows that something hidden can still be real. And somewhere beyond that small ring of light, where the eye keeps failing and the ear keeps guessing, the old balance of the world is waiting, with teeth, with venom, with silence, with gravity, with every hazard that does not need to be seen in order to harm. By the time the sun disappears, the human brain has already begun changing its behavior. It does not wait for complete darkness. It begins the adjustment in advance as the light thins, shadows lengthen, and the fine detail of the world starts to fade. This transition is easy to overlook now, in a life flooded with artificial light, but in a natural setting it is unmistakable. The landscape does not simply grow dim, it becomes less legible. The boundary between one thing and another softens. A branch resembles an arm, a hollow in the earth looks like movement. The mind is forced to work with less information, and under those conditions it becomes, by design, suspicious. This suspicion is not a flaw in the system. It is one of the system's oldest features. Human perception is never a passive recording device. It is an active prediction engine, constantly guessing what the world contains and then comparing those guesses to incoming sensory data. In full daylight, this process is so efficient that it feels effortless. A person glances at a field, a doorway, a face, and almost instantly receives a coherent world. The brain fills gaps, ignores irrelevancies, and stabilizes motion with remarkable speed. But darkness changes the quality of the data. The visual field becomes patchy, contrast weakens, shapes are stripped of detail, movement is harder to localize, the brain must infer more and observe less. And when observation weakens, prediction grows bolder. This is where the fear of darkness moves beyond immediate environmental danger and into the architecture of the mind itself. The human brain is not just afraid because the night contains threats. It is afraid because the night forces the brain into a mood where threat becomes one of the most efficient explanations for uncertainty. Scholars still debate how much of this response is innate and how much is learned through development and culture. But no single explanation fully accounts for how consistently humans become more alert, more suggestible, and more easily startled in low light. The evidence from psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral research points in the same broad direction. When sensory certainty drops, the brain gives more weight to possible danger. This makes evolutionary sense. In an ancestral setting, mistaking a shadow for a predator costs little. Mistaking a predator for a shadow may cost everything. The system is therefore biased toward false positives. It is meant to over-detect. It is meant to imagine the wrong thing some of the time, because being wrong in that direction is safer than being wrong in the other. A rustle in dry grass may only be wind. A shape at the edge of vision may be a stone or a stump. But the nervous system does not wait politely for perfect evidence. It prepares the body first and asks precise questions later. That preparation is fast. Heart rate shifts, muscles hold a little tighter, the startle response becomes easier to trigger. Attention narrows towards sound, movement, and sudden contrast. The body turns resources toward readiness. In modern language, this is often described as fight or flight, but the older and more accurate description is simply vigilance. The organism is less relaxed, more selective, harder to surprise if possible, and more costly to keep in that state for long periods. Darkness keeps that cost running. One lesser-known detail is that the brain's threat systems are not always trying to identify a specific danger. Often they are responding to ambiguity itself. Ambiguity is metabolically expensive. It means the environment cannot be predicted well. It means expectations fail more often. It means the body must hold open more possible explanations at once. This helps explain why darkness can feel unsettling, even in the absence of any obvious threat. It is not always the content of the dark that disturbs. Sometimes it is the instability. The world cannot be read as easily, and the brain dislikes unreadable terrain. This unreadability reaches especially deep because humans are such visually dependent creatures. Other animals build their lives around smell or low-light sensitivity, or hearing finely tuned to nocturnal movement. Human beings, by contrast, trust vision so thoroughly that when vision falters, confidence erodes with it. A person walking through a dim forest may hear the same sounds that exist in daylight, but without reliable sight, those sounds feel altered. The ear, suddenly promoted to primary warning system, becomes more influential and less precise. Ordinary noises swell with meaning. Small sounds feel close. Familiar sounds feel foreign. The mind begins to connect scattered cues into a possible threat pattern, often before it is aware that it is doing so. This is why darkness so often seems populated. A room can feel as though it contains a presence. An empty staircase can feel watched. A corridor can seem to hold movement just outside direct perception. These experiences do not necessarily indicate delusion or irrationality. They arise from ordinary predictive mechanisms doing exactly what they evolved to do when information is poor. What survives in the scientific record suggests that under uncertain conditions the brain is especially willing to detect agency, some hidden watcher, mover, or intention, because agency matters. A rock does not decide to approach. A predator does. A hostile human does. A snake does not think in human terms, but it still acts independently in ways that matter to survival. The brain therefore leans toward explanations that involve active threat. This tendency helps explain why the dark so easily becomes associated with being observed. Many people describe darkness not just as a place where danger may be hiding, but as a condition in which something else has the advantage of seeing them. That sensation is old. It reflects an asymmetry deeply familiar to the ancestral nervous system. The observer cannot see well. The thing being feared might. Whether the imagined watcher is animal, human, supernatural, or entirely undefined. The emotional structure remains strikingly consistent. Sleep complicates the picture further. As the body approaches rest, consciousness loosens its grip on the external world. Attention drifts inward. Sensory filtering changes. Thoughts become less disciplined. In that transitional zone between wakefulness and sleep, the brain is especially good at producing vivid fragments, half-images, sudden sounds, impressions of movement that can feel externally real for a moment before reason catches up. The evidence remains incomplete on exactly how universal these experiences are across time and culture, but they likely reinforce the association between darkness and distorted perception. The night is not only a setting where real threats are harder to see, it is also the time when the mind itself becomes a less reliable narrator. This does not mean fear of the dark is merely a trick of the brain. The older environmental risks are real, as the previous section makes clear, but the brain transforms those risks into a general mode of operation. Once established, The mode can outlive the original setting. A modern person may know there is no predator in the apartment, no hidden ravine in the hallway, no venomous snake beneath the bed. Yet the nervous system still responds to low visibility with caution because the pattern is older than the building, older than the city, older than any modern assurance of safety. Children often show this with particular clarity because they have less experience overriding first responses with abstract reasoning. But adults are not free of it. They have simply learned to narrate around it, to laugh at it, to postpone looking under the bed for a few seconds because some part of the mind briefly prefers not to know what is there. That pause is revealing. It is the old brain buying time, testing uncertainty, hesitating at the threshold where imagination is still stronger than confirmation. There is also a social dimension. Fear calibrates itself by reading others. In low-light settings, one person's tension quickly influences the group. Attention spreads, silence deepens, faces search each other for cues. This likely has very old roots. Shared vigilance increases survival, but it also magnifies emotional contagion. A single startled reaction can make an entire group feel that something is wrong before any evidence appears. Darkness, therefore, becomes not just an individual experience, but a collective psychological field, one in which uncertainty travels quickly and settles heavily. All of this helps explain why fear of darkness is so persistent and so resistant to simple logic. Logic operates best on stable objects. It says the room is empty, the hallway is safe, the window reflects only the trees outside. But the ancient systems underneath logic are not designed to wait for arguments. They are designed to weight risk under uncertainty, and darkness is uncertainty made visible by its own absence. The mind, in other words, is not broken in the dark. It is working as it was shaped to work. It lowers its trust in appearances. It raises its estimate of hidden threat. It becomes quicker to imagine agency, quicker to brace, quicker to believe that incomplete evidence may conceal a costly reality. And somewhere in that adjustment lies one of the oldest human habits of all, the decision to fear first. Because once the light has failed, certainty is no longer the safest guide. Long before walls, before cities, before written memory, there is a simple act that changes the relationship between humans and the night. A branch is placed against another, dry grass catches, a spark takes hold, and something begins to burn in a controlled and sustained way. The flame is small at first, uncertain, easily extinguished. But once it holds, once it grows, it does more than produce heat. It reshapes the boundaries of the world. Fire does not eliminate darkness. It carves into it. The circle of light it creates is narrow, often no more than a few meters across. But within that space something remarkable happens. Shapes regain definition. Faces reappear. Hands can work. Tools can be repaired. Food can be prepared. Wounds can be seen and treated. The mind, which only moments before is straining to interpret shadow, begins to settle, not completely, not permanently, but enough to create a contrast that is deeply felt. Inside the light there is order. Outside it there is not. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that controlled use of fire becomes one of the most important turning points in human prehistory. Burned bones, charcoal deposits, repeated hearth structures, these traces point to a growing ability not just to create fire, but to maintain it, to return to it, to depend on it. Scholars still debate exactly when fire becomes reliably controlled across different human populations, but its psychological significance is difficult to overstate, because fire does something that no other early tool can do. It pushes the night back. Not far, not permanently, but enough to create a new kind of space, a defended space, a defined space, a space where human senses begin to function again, even if only partially. The flickering light restores edges, restores contrast, restores the ability to recognize one another without relying solely on voice or touch. It also does something subtler. It provides a visual anchor, a center, a place where attention can settle instead of constantly scanning the unknown. This changes behavior immediately. Groups gather more tightly. Movement becomes organized around the fire. Tasks that would be impossible in complete darkness become manageable within its reach. Social interaction extends into the night. There is time to sit, to observe, to remain awake together rather than retreat instantly to sleep. Some researchers suggest that this extension of waking hours may have influenced the development of language, storytelling, and social bonds. The evidence remains incomplete, but the possibility is difficult to ignore. The night, once dominated entirely by danger and withdrawal, begins to contain moments of shared presence. But the fire is not a wall, it is a signal. Its light exposes the immediate surroundings, but it also casts shadows that move and distort. The flicker of flame causes objects to shift in appearance, stretching and shrinking, appearing and disappearing at the edge of perception. Faces change shape as light dances across them. Hands look larger or smaller depending on their distance from the flame. The brain, already inclined towards suspicion in low light, now has to interpret a world that is constantly in motion, even when nothing is actually moving. This introduces a new layer of ambiguity. The fire protects, but it also transforms perception, and beyond its reach, the darkness remains intact. The contrast between these two zones becomes one of the most powerful structures in early human experience. The inner circle is warmth, visibility, and relative safety. The outer darkness is distance, concealment, and potential threat. The boundary between them is thin and unstable. A few steps in either direction can change everything. This boundary must be maintained, watched, respected. Fuel must be gathered. Flames must be fed. Ash must be cleared. The fire cannot be left to fade. There is a discipline to this, a rhythm that becomes embedded in daily life. Someone is always responsible for tending the flame. Someone must remain awake long enough to ensure it does not die unexpectedly. The group depends on it not just for comfort, but for survival. If the fire goes out in the middle of the night, the transition back to full darkness is immediate and severe. The eyes, adapted to flickering light, must suddenly adjust to near total absence of it. The psychological impact is sharp. The world collapses outward again. This fragility matters. It means that safety is conditional. It must be maintained actively. It can fail. This awareness reinforces the deeper lesson that darkness is never fully conquered. It is only held back for a time, with effort, with attention, with resources. The fire becomes a symbol of control, but also a reminder of how limited that control is. Predators respond to this boundary in their own way. Some avoid fire, at least at close range, deterred by heat, light, and unfamiliar movement. Others learn to circle at a distance, testing the edge of its influence. What survives in the record suggests that fire reduces risk, but does not eliminate it. The night remains inhabited. The difference is that now humans have a tool that changes the terms of engagement. Still, the fire carries a cost beyond effort and exposure. It isolates. A group clustered around a fire can see each other clearly, but their ability to see beyond the light is reduced. The brightness creates a kind of visual blindness to the outer darkness. eyes adjusted to flame struggle to detect movement in the surrounding night. This means that while the fire reveals the interior, it conceals the exterior more effectively. The boundary becomes not just a line of safety, but a line of uncertainty. The group knows that something could be just beyond the light, and that they may not see it until it is already close. This tension becomes part of the experience of night. The fire is trusted, but not entirely. The darkness is feared, but not entirely avoided. The two exist together, defining each other. Over time, this relationship shapes not only survival strategies, but also emotional patterns. The feeling of safety becomes associated with light, with warmth, with proximity to others. The feeling of exposure becomes associated with distance from the fire, with cold, with isolation. These associations are reinforced night after night, in conditions where the consequences of misjudging them can be severe. What survives in the anthropological record suggests that early humans do not simply use fire as a tool. They organize themselves around it. It becomes a center of gravity, both physically and psychologically. It is where the group returns, where decisions are made, where the vulnerable are protected, where the day ends and the night is endured. But it also becomes something else, a threshold, a visible line between what is known and what is not, between what can be seen and what must be imagined, between the human world and everything beyond it. This threshold is never stable. It shifts with the flame, expands and contracts, flickers and distorts. It can be strengthened, but never made permanent. It requires constant attention, constant negotiation with the environment. And in that negotiation, a deeper pattern forms. Humans begin to understand darkness not just as a condition to survive, but as a domain that must be managed, respected, and watched. Because even with fire, the night does not disappear. It waits. It presses against the edges of light. It fills every space the flame cannot reach. And just beyond that shifting boundary, where the glow fades into shadow, the old imbalance still exists, unchanged, patient, and as complete as it has ever been. Once darkness becomes more than a practical danger, it begins to collect meaning. The transformation is slow, uneven, and impossible to date precisely. But it appears almost everywhere human beings leave behind signs of belief. Night stops being only the hour of hidden animals and uncertain ground. It becomes the hour when the world itself feels less stable, when the boundary between the visible and the invisible loosens, and when forces that cannot be seen in daylight seem somehow closer. The fear remains rooted in survival, but now it acquires language, image, and ritual shape. This is one of the most enduring habits of the human mind. When uncertainty persists for long enough, people do not merely endure it, they explain it. They give it a face, a voice, a pattern. In daylight, the world appears legible enough to invite practical cause and effect. But in darkness, cause becomes harder to track. Sounds emerge without visible sources. Shapes change before they can be identified. Dreams spill into waking memory. Illness, death, disappearance. And misfortune often seem to arrive in ways no one can fully observe. Under those conditions, the unseen does not remain empty for long. It becomes inhabited. What survives across the ancient world suggests that darkness is rarely imagined as neutral. In some places it is sacred, in others polluted, in others dangerous, fertile, ancestral, or divine. Often it is several of these at once. Night can belong to the dead, to wandering spirits, to gods who move beyond ordinary human sight, to demons, tricksters, witches, or nameless presences that live just outside the boundary of firelight. Scholars still debate how much these ideas emerge from direct environmental fear and how much from broader symbolic systems. But the pattern is unmistakable. Human cultures repeatedly treat darkness as a realm where ordinary rules weaken. This does not mean ancient people are simply irrational in the face of night. Quite the opposite. Belief often serves as a structure for dealing with unpredictability. If darkness is dangerous, then rituals can be designed to manage danger. Boundaries can be marked. Taboos can be established. Lamps can be kept burning for reasons that are partly practical and partly sacred. Words can be avoided after sunset. Thresholds can be blessed. Certain places can be forbidden at night. Certain noises can be interpreted. Certain forms of silence can become ominous. Belief gives pattern to uncertainty, and pattern makes fear easier to carry. A lesser-known detail, visible in many older traditions, is that darkness is not always feared because it hides evil. Sometimes it is feared because it is thought to dissolve categories. The dead may walk, ancestors may return, the sick may drift closer to other worlds. The forest may no longer belong entirely to the living. In such settings, fear comes not from a single monster lurking in the dark, but from a temporary breakdown in the usual arrangement of reality. Night is the time when separation itself grows weak. That fragility is important. Human beings rely heavily on boundaries inside and outside, living and dead, safe and unsafe, village and wilderness, known and unknown. Darkness destabilizes every one of them. It makes the familiar strange and the strange impossible to verify. A hut, a cave, a path, a burial place, a tree line, a shoreline, each becomes harder to classify after sunset. What survives in the ethnographic and historical record suggests that many cultures respond to this instability not by denying it, but by formalizing it. Night receives its own rules because it is felt to be a different condition of existence. This helps explain why some of the oldest ritual behaviors cluster around evening and nightfall. Fires are tended with care beyond mere utility. Lamps are placed at entrances. Protective gestures are repeated. Children are kept near the center of habitation. The sick are watched more closely. The dead may be treated according to stricter rules after dark. The evidence remains incomplete, and customs vary enormously across time and place. But the pattern suggests something consistent. Darkness is not simply endured passively. It is negotiated through repeated acts that are practical, symbolic, or both. The imagination of spirits likely grows in this same terrain, not because people are foolish, but because darkness produces the exact sensory conditions under which unseen agency feels plausible. A noise without a source, a shifting human silhouette, an animal call that sounds almost like speech, a dream that lingers into waking, an illness that worsens overnight. None of these requires supernatural explanation, yet all are fertile material for it. The mind already leans toward detecting presence in the dark. Culture then refines that tendency, teaching people what kinds of presence to expect. And once a culture begins to expect certain beings in darkness, perception itself is shaped by that expectation. This is where fear becomes inherited in a second way, not only through biology, but through narrative. A child learns that night is dangerous from the body first, from separation, dimness, uncertain shapes, but then learns from adults what kind of danger it contains. That danger may be described as wolves, strangers, ghosts, demons, ancestral punishments, night spirits, forest women, hungry dead, or divine watchers. The names differ, The emotional structure remains surprisingly stable. Something may be there. It may know you are there. It may cross into the human world more easily after dark. No single explanation fully accounts for why certain motifs recur so widely. Some may arise independently because humans everywhere share similar sensory limits. Some may spread through contact. Some may reflect recurring experiences such as sleep paralysis, nightmares, or nocturnal predation later dressed in symbolic clothing. Scholars remain cautious here, because direct evidence for the earliest beliefs is thin. But what survives in oral traditions, later texts, burial customs, and ritual practices suggest that darkness becomes a vast symbolic field onto which human anxiety, memory, grief, and cosmology are projected. The dead are especially important in this regard. Darkness resembles death in obvious ways. It is still, silent, cold, and visually empty. The sleeping body, nearly motionless and temporarily unreachable, can appear unnervingly close to the dead body. Dreams create encounters with absent people, including the recently lost. Mourning often intensifies at night, when distraction fades and thought grows less disciplined. In many societies then, night becomes the natural time of return for the dead, not because evidence proves such return, but because the emotional and sensory logic of darkness makes it feel almost reasonable. What survives in the record suggests that many people experience the night as a zone where memory itself becomes animate. This can make darkness intimate as well as frightening. A night spirit is not always a predator. It may be an ancestor, a warning, a messenger, or a witness. Yet even where darkness is revered, it is rarely casual. Respect and fear stand close together. The sacred is often dangerous precisely because it exceeds ordinary human control. To enter deep darkness is to enter a space where the world is not arranged for human comfort. That idea survives for a very long time. Even in literate civilizations, where astronomy, religion, and architecture develop elaborate interpretations of the cosmos, night remains double-edged. It reveals the stars, the heavens, the larger order of creation. At the same time, it conceals the immediate ground beneath one's feet. It is vast and magnificent overhead, treacherous and uncertain below. Human beings lift their eyes to divine pattern while their bodies remain tense about what moves unseen at ground level. This split may be one reason darkness acquires such extraordinary symbolic depth. It is both sublime and threatening, both doorway and ambush. By now, fear is no longer only a physical reflex. It is embedded in custom, in warning, in inherited stories told close to the fire. Children absorb not just the habit of staying near the light, but the reason one must do so. Adults reinforce rules that may once have been simple safety measures and now carry sacred authority. Do not go there after sunset. Do not answer that voice outside. Do not whistle at night. Do not sleep near the burial ground. Do not cross the water in darkness. Do not leave the lamp unlit. Behind each prohibition is a practical world of hazard, but also a symbolic world that makes the hazard memorable. And that may be the deeper function of many such beliefs. They preserve caution by making it vivid. A child may forget an abstract warning about uneven ground, nocturnal animals, or strangers. A child is less likely to forget that the dark edge of the village belongs to something that should not be disturbed. So the shadows fill, not randomly, but according to the needs of memory, fear, and culture. The night becomes crowded with meanings because the human mind has always disliked emptiness when emptiness feels consequential. Better to imagine the dark as inhabited than to admit it may be dangerous in ways too shapeless to name. And once spirits, ancestors, demons, and watchers have entered the night, they do not leave easily. They remain for centuries, sometimes for millennia, changing names but not function, standing at the edge of human sight as companions to a much older truth that darkness first frightened people because it made them vulnerable, and later kept frightening them because it seemed to reveal that vulnerability in cosmic form. There is a moment in the night when the external world fades just enough for the internal one to begin speaking more loudly. It comes not in full wakefulness and not in full sleep, but in the unstable ground between them, where perception loosens and the mind begins to generate its own images with unusual clarity. In that space, the fear of darkness takes on a different character. It is no longer only about what may exist outside the body, but about what the body itself can produce. For most of human history, this experience is common, though rarely understood in technical terms. A person lies down near a fire or in a shelter, the surrounding darkness pressing close, the sounds of the night continuing just beyond awareness. The body relaxes, but not completely. Muscles release slowly, breathing deepens, the mind drifts, and then something happens that feels, even today, profoundly real. The body refuses to move. The eyes may open or remain closed, but the sense of being awake arrives before the ability to act. The chest feels heavy. The limbs are unresponsive. The room or the cave or the shelter seems to contain a presence. Something stands nearby, or sits, or leans, or watches. The details vary, but the structure is strikingly consistent across cultures and time. The figure may be human, animal, shadow-like, or entirely undefined. It may press down, whisper, approach, or simply exist in the same space. The experience is vivid, immediate, and often terrifying. Modern science calls this sleep paralysis, a condition in which the brain wakes before the body fully exits its immobilized sleep state. But naming it does not diminish its intensity. What survives in the medical and psychological record suggests that during such episodes, the brain's threat detection systems remain highly active, while voluntary control is suppressed. The result is a state where fear can be felt without the ability to respond, and where imagined or misinterpreted sensory input feels entirely real. The evidence remains incomplete on how frequently these experiences shaped early human beliefs, but the possibility is difficult to dismiss. In a world already primed to expect danger in darkness, an episode like this does not appear as a neurological glitch. It appears as confirmation. Something is there. Something is holding the body down. Something has entered the space. Across different cultures, similar descriptions emerge: a weight on the chest, a figure in the room, a presence that cannot be escaped. Names change: night demons, shadow beings, ancestral visitors, hostile spirits, but the experience underneath them shows remarkable continuity. Scholars still debate whether these similarities reflect shared biology alone, or whether cultural exchange also plays a role. No single explanation fully accounts for the universality of the pattern, but the overlap is striking enough to suggest that human physiology itself contributes directly to some of the oldest night fears. Dreams deepen this effect. Unlike waking thought, dreams are not constrained by the same rules of logic or continuity. They assemble fragments of memory, sensation, and emotion into sequences that feel coherent while they are happening, even when they make little sense afterward. In darkness, especially in environments with minimal external stimulation, dreams can become more vivid, more immersive, and more difficult to separate from waking reality. A person may dream of being chased, attacked, lost, or observed. then wake abruptly into darkness where the dream lingers for a few crucial seconds. The body is already reacting, heart racing, muscles tense, breath quickened. The surroundings are still unclear. The mind has not yet fully reoriented. In that gap, the dream spills into the waking world, reinforcing the sense that something external has occurred. What survives in the anthropological and historical record suggests that many cultures treat dreams not as internal fabrications, but as experiences with meaning messages, warnings, encounters with other realms. In daylight, these interpretations may be discussed, debated, or ritualized, but at night, especially in the moment of waking, they can feel immediate and physical. The boundary between inner and outer dissolves, and the fear that arises does not need to distinguish between the two. This is one reason darkness becomes associated not just with danger, but with intrusion. The idea that something can enter the human space physically, spiritually, or psychologically takes root in these moments. A shadow seen at the edge of vision, a figure perceived during paralysis, a voice heard in the transition between sleep and waking, each reinforces the belief that the night is permeable. The body itself contributes to this perception in subtle ways. Breathing changes during sleep. The chest may feel constricted, the heart rate fluctuates, blood pressure shifts. Small muscle movements or the lack of them can be misinterpreted. In a fully lit, fully alert state, these changes go unnoticed, in darkness. When attention is already tuned to possible threat, they become significant. A tightening in the chest may feel like external pressure. A change in airflow may feel like a presence nearby. The mind, searching for explanation, fills the gap. There is also the phenomenon of auditory ambiguity. At night, the ear becomes a primary sense, but it is not always reliable. Sounds carry differently in cooler air. Distant noises can seem closer. Small movements can be magnified. The brain, working with incomplete information, attempts to organize these sounds into patterns. Sometimes it succeeds. Sometimes it produces something that feels like a voice, a step, a movement that is not actually there. Scholars still debate the extent to which such auditory misinterpretations contribute to night fears, but the mechanism is well understood under uncertain conditions. Perception leans toward meaningful interpretation, even when none exists. All of this creates a powerful feedback loop. Darkness reduces reliable sensory input. The brain compensates by increasing prediction. Prediction favors threat. Internal experiences, dreams, paralysis, bodily sensations are interpreted as external events. Fear intensifies, reinforcing the expectation of danger. Over time, this loop becomes familiar. It becomes part of the human experience of night. It does not require a real predator, a real intruder, or a real supernatural presence to function. It only requires uncertainty, a body prepared for danger, and a mind built to fill gaps quickly. This helps explain why fear of the dark can persist even in environments where physical danger is minimal. A person in a secure home, in a locked room, in a quiet building, may still experience the same patterns. The body shifts into vigilance. The mind imagines presence. A small sound becomes significant. A shadow seems to move. A moment of paralysis or a lingering dream introduces a figure that feels external. Logic arrives after. It explains. It reassures, but it does not prevent the initial response. This is not a failure of reasoning. It is the result of systems that evolved long before reasoning took its current form. The brain's first priority is not to be correct in every detail. It is to avoid catastrophic error. Darkness is one of the conditions under which catastrophic error becomes more likely, and so the brain becomes more active, more cautious, more willing to generate possibilities that feel real. In that sense, the fear of the dark is not only about the environment outside, it is also about the environment inside. The realization that the mind itself can produce convincing illusions under certain conditions adds another layer to the unease. The night is not just a place where something might be hiding. It is a place where perception itself becomes less stable, where the line between real and imagined can blur in ways that are difficult to control, and that may be one of the most unsettling aspects of all. Because even if every external threat is removed, even if the room is empty and the door is locked, the experience of darkness can still carry the weight of something approaching, something watching, something present just beyond confirmation, not because it is there, but because the brain, shaped by millions of years of uncertainty, has learned that in the dark it is safer to believe that it might be. The fear often appears first in those who understand the least about it. A child can stand in a bright room, perfectly calm, then refuse to cross the same room once the light is gone, as if the darkness has altered not just visibility, but the nature of the space itself. Adults tend to describe this as imagination, and of course imagination is involved. But that explanation is too thin to carry the full weight of what is happening. Childhood fear of darkness is one of the clearest places where biology, development, memory, and culture meet. It begins with dependence. A young child survives by staying close to larger, more capable bodies. Protection is not abstract. It is physical proximity, familiar voices, predictable light, known boundaries, and the repeated reassurance that the world remains stable when the child cannot verify it alone. Darkness disrupts all of these at once. Faces become harder to read. Distance becomes harder to judge. The room grows less legible. The child, whose understanding of space and safety is still being built, experiences the loss of light not merely as inconvenience, but as a partial collapse of certainty. This makes developmental sense. Children do not yet possess the accumulated evidence adults use to correct first impressions. They have fewer repetitions of harmless nights, fewer conceptual tools for separating sensation from danger, fewer habits of dismissing unexplained sounds. Scholars still debate which elements of fear of darkness are learned through social cues and which reflect deeper inherited tendencies. But what survives in developmental research suggests that some wariness of darkness emerges early and reliably enough to hint at ancient roots. It may not be fully inborn in a simple, mechanical sense, yet neither is it a random cultural invention. The body seems prepared to treat low visibility with caution. Childhood simply reveals that preparation more openly. There is another reason the fear appears so early. Children live much closer to the boundary between waking and imagination than adults usually remember. Their mental images are often vivid, immediate, and only partially disciplined by habit. A sound under a bed can become a hidden being with startling speed. The dark corner of a room can feel occupied long before it is consciously interpreted as such. This is not stupidity. It is a mind still learning how to rank possibilities. In daylight, evidence crowds out invention. In darkness, invention suddenly has room to move. What survives in family customs, folklore, and educational habits across many societies suggests that adults have always recognized this vulnerability, even when they explain it differently. Protective objects are placed near sleeping children. Lamps are left burning. Doors are checked twice. Words of reassurance become ritualized. Night prayers, lullabies, and bedtime stories serve many purposes. but one of them is unmistakable. They help manage the child's passage into darkness. The practical and the symbolic blur together here, just as they do in so many older responses to night. A lesser-known point is that children may not primarily fear darkness itself. Often they fear separation, and darkness intensifies separation. A parent leaves the room, the lights go out, and the child loses both visual control and social proximity at once. The darkness is frightening partly because it arrives with absence. The same room may feel manageable when an adult remains nearby, even if the light is low. This suggests that fear of the dark in childhood is not only about hidden threats in the environment, but also about the loss of reliable attachment signals. In evolutionary terms, that makes profound sense. A child isolated in the dark is not simply uncomfortable. In ancestral settings, isolation could be catastrophic. This may be why so many childhood night fears cluster around being alone rather than simply being unable to see. The hallway is worse when no one is in it. The bedroom feels more exposed after the door closes. The space under the bed matters because it is nearby yet concealed, intimate yet inaccessible. Children fear what is close enough to matter but hidden enough to resist verification. In that, they are not so different from adults. They are simply more honest about the intensity of it. No single explanation fully accounts for the specific imagery children attach to darkness. Some fears clearly emerge from stories they have heard, from films, warnings, overheard adult anxieties, or cultural images of monsters and intruders. Others seem to arise with very little prompting. Faces in curtains, figures in wardrobes, eyes at windows. What survives in observational studies suggests that children often generate their own night threats from surprisingly sparse material. A shape, a sound, a partially open door, these are enough. The mind does the rest. That pattern echoes the older human habit of threat prediction under uncertainty. The child, lacking strong counterweights of experience, produces more vivid possibilities and believes them more quickly. But it would be a mistake to assume adulthood completely replaces this process. Adults still do much the same, only with stronger mechanisms for suppression and ridicule. Many laugh at the fear of looking into a dark mirror, stepping into an unlit basement, or checking a strange noise downstairs. Yet the pause before doing so can be quite real. Childhood makes the structure visible because it has not yet been disguised. Cultural training shapes the fear in both directions. Some adults soothe it gently, gradually teaching that darkness changes little except perception. Others sharpen it deliberately. Using night as a discipline, do not go out after dark. Dangerous people are outside. Spirits roam at night. The woods are not safe. The dark belongs to things you do not understand. Such warnings may preserve useful caution, but they also provide the child with narrative content that can remain for years. What began as a bodily unease becomes a stocked theatre of possibilities. There is a strange balance here. Children must learn not to fear every shadow, but they must also learn that some caution is wise. A world without fear would be dangerous. A world ruled entirely by fear would be unlivable. So adults guide children through darkness with a mixture of reassurance and warning. Often without realizing they are reenacting one of the oldest educational tasks in human life, teaching the young how to survive the hours when vision fails. Sleep deepens the challenge. Children often move more abruptly between dreams and waking distress. A nightmare can feel immediate long after the eyes open. Night terrors, vivid dream fragments, and half-waking confusion are all capable of turning ordinary darkness into evidence of ongoing danger. The child cries out not because the fear is symbolic or exaggerated, but because at the level of experience it is happening now. The room is dim. The body is activated. The imagined threat has not yet dissolved. What survives in clinical and developmental observations suggests that these episodes can be intense, even when the child later remembers little or nothing of them. This may be one reason adults across cultures create transitional rituals at bedtime. Songs, stories, blessings, routines, fixed objects, a partly open door, a lamp in the hallway. These all help stabilize the shift from shared, illuminated wakefulness to solitary darkness. The routine itself becomes a form of protective architecture. It tells the child that the world remains ordered, that the unseen has limits, that morning will return because it always has. In practical terms, this may seem simple. In psychological terms, it is profound. It helps build one of the mind's most important long-term abilities, the capacity to tolerate uncertainty without populating it completely with threat. Still, that ability is never perfect. What survives from childhood in many adults is not just memory, but structure. The old sensitivity remains, quieter perhaps, less public, but present. A dark room still invites a faster heartbeat before logic intervenes. A hallway in the middle of the night still feels longer than it does at noon. The child's mind is not entirely replaced. It is layered over. Beneath the confident modern self remains an older form of vigilance. And beneath that perhaps something older still. A deep ancestral lesson that darkness reduces control and that small bodies, especially, should not face it alone. This is why childhood fear matters so much to the wider story. It is not a trivial phase. It is a window. In children, the ancient grammar of darkness is still easy to read. Dependence, vulnerability, imagination, separation, incomplete perception, learned warning, inherited caution all appear with unusual clarity. The species seems to rehearse its own history in miniature, teaching each new generation that the night is survivable, but never entirely ordinary. And even after that lesson is learned, some part of it remains. A shadow still lingers at the edge of meaning. A closed door still feels different after midnight. The room is still the room, and yet not quite. And in that difference, the child recognizes something the adult later spends years trying to explain away, that darkness does not have to change the world very much to make it feel as though it has changed completely. For thousands of years, human beings do not defeat the night so much as negotiate with it. They build walls, raise gates, lay out streets, carry lamps, and organize their settlements in ways that promise at least a partial victory over darkness. But even as villages become towns and towns become cities, the old problem remains stubbornly alive. Night does not vanish when civilization expands. It merely changes shape. A fire at the edge of a prehistoric camp creates one kind of boundary. A walled settlement with guarded entrances creates another. The principle is the same. Human beings define a space, illuminate part of it, and attempt to make it legible after sunset. Inside that managed zone, movement can continue a little longer. Tasks can be completed. Goods can be watched. People can gather with less fear of immediate attack from animals or strangers. Yet what survives in the historical record suggests that these efforts never produce total security. They produce islands of order in a condition still fundamentally shaped by darkness. The earliest urban places understand this well. Streets are narrow, buildings crowd close, open drains, animals refuse, and uneven surfaces make ordinary movement difficult even by day. At night, these same features become hazards. A lamp can help, but its radius is small. Torches smoke, gutters overflow, shadows remain thick between buildings, and one corner can still conceal what the next does not reveal. A city, despite all its concentration of people, often contains more darkness than a smaller settlement. Density creates blind spots, architecture creates concealment, sound echoes strangely and carries imperfectly. The human instinct to fear what cannot be clearly seen finds new material here. This is one of the most important shifts in the story. In wilderness, darkness belongs to predators, weather, terrain, and distance. In settlements, darkness begins to belong to other people. That transfer matters. The night is still physically dangerous, but now it is socially dangerous as well. What survives in the records of ancient and later civilizations suggests that night is repeatedly associated with theft, ambush, trespass, fire, secret meetings, and forms of disorder that flourish best when witnesses are scarce. Laws sometimes distinguish between offences committed by day and by night. Watchmen appear, curfews emerge, lamps are regulated, gates are closed. Patrols move through urban darkness not because night is symbolic, but because it remains operationally difficult to control. Scholars still debate how effective these measures truly are in different places and periods, but the intention is unmistakable. Settled societies try to discipline the night. They do this materially first. Oil lamps, candles, braziers, lanterns, and street lighting in modest forms all extend the territory of visibility. The ability to carry light changes movement. A person no longer depends entirely on fixed fires or moonlight. Hallways, courtyards, shrines, workspaces, and streets can be partially stabilized after sunset. This likely alters the emotional experience of darkness in subtle ways. The night becomes less absolute. It acquires gradations. There is deep darkness, but also managed darkness, negotiated darkness, darkness interrupted by pockets of flame. And yet these pockets may also intensify the contrast with what lies beyond them. A lit doorway makes the alley outside look blacker. A lantern carried through a street creates a small moving island of certainty surrounded by shifting obscurity. The very act of illumination teaches the eye how much remains concealed. No single explanation fully accounts for the emotional power of urban night, but part of it comes from this rhythm of brief clarity and immediate concealment. The city promises mastery, then withholds it at the next corner. There is a lesser-known contradiction here. As settlements grow more permanent and more sophisticated, they also become more dependent on routines that night interrupts. Trade slows, travel becomes riskier, communication becomes harder, observation weakens. The social body, not just the individual body, becomes more vulnerable after dark. A fire in daylight may be contained more easily. A fire at night may spread before anyone understands its scale. A missing person disappears more completely. A cry for help is harder to place. Darkness does not simply frighten individuals, it weakens administration, surveillance, and response. It limits the reach of order itself. This helps explain why night acquires such a strong moral charge in many civilizations. It is not only the hour of spirits or bad dreams, it is the hour when rules become harder to enforce. That alone is enough to make darkness seem suspect. What survives in legal, religious, and social traditions suggests that nighttime behavior is often watched more closely, judged more harshly, or treated as inherently more questionable than the same behavior by day. Secrecy and darkness become natural companions because each amplifies the other. But civilization also teaches people to live with night in more intimate ways. Domestic interiors begin to matter more. The home becomes a controlled light space distinct from the unlit world outside. Curtains, shutters, doors, hearths, and lamps all contribute to a new emotional architecture. Safety is no longer only a circle around a communal fire. It can be a room, a threshold, a household. This makes darkness more containable, but also more psychological. Once outside, threats are partially managed by walls and neighbours. The night's power shifts inward. It lives in the staircase, the corridor, the courtyard, the sound beyond the shutter, the unknown visitor at the door. What survives in descriptions of pre-modern life often reveals this layered quality of nighttime fear. People worry about physical attack, certainly, but they also worry about getting lost inside familiar streets, about losing orientation, about mistaking one house for another, about hearing footsteps they cannot identify, about watching shadows move across walls made active by lamp flame. The city does not erase ancient fear, it refines it. Wilderness becomes architecture. Predation becomes intrusion. Distance becomes enclosure. Moonlight complicates matters further. In the modern imagination, it often appears gentle, romantic, almost protective, but for much of history it is unreliable assistance. It illuminates unevenly, changes with cloud and phase, and often creates a deceptive world of silver edges and black voids. The evidence remains incomplete on how different societies emotionally rank moonlit versus moonless nights. But what survives in literature and practical custom suggests a consistent ambivalence. The moon helps, but it also deceives. It reveals enough to invite movement, yet not enough to guarantee safety. Shapes sharpen and flatten at once. The world becomes theatrical, uncanny, beautiful, and difficult to trust. Cities try to answer all this with structure. Roads are aligned, markets are centralized, public spaces are defined, gates mark entry and exit, towers extend visibility, bells or calls divide the hours. The night is measured, announced, watched, and increasingly absorbed into civic life. But measurement is not mastery. A watchman can call the hour and still fail to see what moves in the lane below. A city may boast walls and yet remain full of dark corners. A household may bolt its door and still lie awake listening. What survives in the record suggests that one of civilization's greatest achievements is not removing fear of darkness, but redistributing it. Some forms diminish, others intensify. Wild animals retreat from dense habitation, at least in many regions. In their place come thieves, drunks, secret lovers, arsonists, political conspirators, wandering strangers, and every category of human uncertainty that thrives in low visibility. The old body does not care much whether the unseen threat has claws or a knife or simply unknown intention. It registers incomplete information and responds as it always has. Artificial light expands slowly, then dramatically in later eras, but even before those transformations, the desire is clear. Human societies repeatedly invest labor and resources in extending visibility. That fact alone says something important. Light is not only useful for practical work, it is emotionally corrective. It pushes back against ambiguity. It restores the legibility on which trust depends. The persistence of lighting technologies across cultures suggests that the need runs deeper than convenience. People do not merely want to see, they want to feel that space has returned to human terms. And still, the night resists complete domestication. The outer road beyond the gate remains dark. The alleys between homes remain dark. The countryside beyond the fields remains dark. The upper sky remains dark. Even within cities, darkness survives in fragments and pockets, in places not fully reached by communal effort. That may be why it remains so symbolically potent. Civilization claims order, but the night keeps revealing the limits of that claim. It reminds even the most settled society that visibility is conditional, that control has edges. That much of human confidence depends on seeing clearly enough to believe the world is where it should be. So the city tries, generation after generation, to defeat night with design. It narrows uncertainty. It multiplies thresholds. It places flame at doors, towers at walls, guards in streets, families inside lit rooms. And in doing so, it teaches a lesson as old as the first fire and as modern as any street lamp darkness can be managed, divided, regulated, and named, but never fully removed. Somewhere beyond the reach of every lamp, something remains unseen, and the mind, ancient beneath all urban order, continues to listen for it. Once darkness becomes part of urban life, it gathers a new reputation that has nothing to do with wolves or cliff edges, and everything to do with other human beings. The danger is no longer only that something might be hiding in the night. It is that someone might be using the night on purpose. This is a profound change, and it leaves a deep mark on the way human beings think about darkness. In the older landscape, fear after sunset is tied to exposure. A person is vulnerable because the world becomes harder to read. In settlements and cities, that vulnerability remains, but it is joined by intention. The unseen threat may now be another mind, another will, another human being who understands the same concealment and chooses to exploit it. Night becomes not just the hour of uncertainty, but the hour of strategy. What survives in historical records from many different societies suggests that this association emerges early and persists stubbornly. Theft, assault, trespass, smuggling, illicit meetings, political plotting, and sudden violence all find natural cover in low visibility. Even when nighttime crime is not statistically dominant in every period, the perception of danger after dark becomes culturally powerful. Scholars still debate how closely public fear of nocturnal crime matches actual rates across different historical settings. But perception itself matters. A city can feel dangerous at night even where the evidence is mixed, because darkness magnifies the sense that consequences may arrive without warning. The mind is well prepared for this conclusion. Human beings are social animals, but never fully trusting ones. We are exquisitely tuned to signs of intention in other people's posture, gait, direction of gaze, changes in voice, patterns of approach. Darkness strips away many of those signals. A figure in daylight can be read in seconds. A figure at night may remain a silhouette until it is too close. Is the person passers-by, watching, following, drunk, frightened, armed, lost, harmless, desperate? In low light the answers come late, and the delay itself becomes frightening. This is one reason darkness in settled life often feels sharper than wilderness in the imagination. A forest may contain unknown dangers, but a city at night contains unknowable motives. The human mind, already prone to threat prediction under uncertainty, is forced to interpret incomplete social information, and that often proves more disturbing than animal danger. A predator behaves according to instinct. Another person may behave according to grievance, greed, hunger, shame, revenge, fear, or simple opportunism. No single explanation fully accounts for why urban darkness feels morally charged, but the hidden human will is almost certainly part of it. That moral charge spreads quickly through custom and language. The night becomes associated with wrongdoing not only because crimes happen in darkness, but because darkness seems to suit them. acts carried out unseen acquire an additional layer of suspicion. People assume concealment implies guilt. Secrecy and darkness become companions in law, religion, and ordinary conversation. To do something openly is one thing. To do it at night is another. The same movement, the same meeting. The same knock at a door can feel entirely different after sunset. What survives in legal traditions often reflects this distinction. Certain acts are punished more harshly when committed at night. The breaking of a household boundary after dark carries special weight. Curfews appear not merely as tools of order, but as admissions of anxiety. Authorities repeatedly attempt to reduce the hours during which ordinary people move freely in darkness, because darkness interferes with surveillance, and therefore with power. The night protects not only the criminal, but also the politically dangerous, the socially disruptive, the person who wishes not to be seen. There is a lesser-known paradox in this. The same darkness that frightens respectable society can also shelter the vulnerable, runaways, dissidents, illicit lovers, persecuted minorities, smugglers, rebels, and the poor often use darkness as cover because daylight belongs more completely to the regulated world. So the night is not simply evil in human history, it is also a refuge from scrutiny. What survives in the record suggests that darkness repeatedly serves both oppression and escape. This duality makes its reputation more unstable, and perhaps more potent. The night belongs to criminals in one story and to survivors in another. Often it belongs to both at once. Even so, fear tends to remember the worst possibilities most vividly. A person walking through a dark lane does not usually think first about hidden compassion or secret resistance. The body thinks about ambush. It thinks about footsteps matching pace from behind. It thinks about a face that cannot be read, a doorway that suddenly produces movement, a hand from the unseen. The older ancestral system of vigilance merges seamlessly with newer social risks. Darkness once concealed claws and venom. Now it conceals motive. This is where panic begins to thrive. Panic is not simply fear intensified. It is fear made contagious under conditions of poor information, in darkness, especially in crowded settlements. Uncertainty spreads fast. One cry can produce 10 explanations before anyone verifies what happened. People run because others run. Doors slam. Rumors accelerate. A vague report becomes a detailed threat within minutes. What survives in chronicles, urban legends, and later newspaper culture suggests that nighttime panic often grows from this combination of incomplete perception and social amplification. Something happened. No one saw clearly. Therefore, everything is possible. The unseen attacker, the prowler, the poisoner, the night visitor, the child stealer, the shape at the window, such figures recur not because all societies face the same exact dangers, but because darkness favours certain forms of fear. It protects the half-glimpsed. It allows fragments of evidence to carry immense emotional weight. A footprint, a sound, a missing object, a rumour of someone seen near a gate, a lantern moving where it should not. These are enough to animate an entire neighbourhood. Scholars still debate how many famous moral panics or crime waves are inflated by rumour, but the mechanism is familiar. Darkness weakens verification and strengthens imagination. Social fear rushes in to fill the gap. This helps explain why certain professions emerge as keepers of nighttime reassurance. Watchmen, guards, patrols, night clerks, lamplighters, gatekeepers. These are not just workers. They are visible signs that someone is still awake on behalf of order. Their presence matters psychologically as much as practically. A lit street and a passing watchman do not guarantee safety. but they reduce the feeling of abandonment. They tell the nervous system that the world has not been entirely surrendered to uncertainty, and yet the reassurance is always partial. A patrol passes, then the street falls quiet again. A lamp burns at one corner, leaving the next in shadow. The guard cannot be everywhere. This incompleteness may be one reason nighttime fear remains so durable even in highly organized societies. Human systems of order do not abolish vulnerability, they merely interrupt it. The old brain notices the interruptions, but it also notices the gaps between them. Domestic life absorbs this tension. Families check locks, windows are barred, doors are bolted with small rituals that are partly practical and partly calming. The household becomes a defended island, but a delicate one. Every sound from outside acquires disproportionate weight once the family is gathered inside. A knock after dark is never just a knock. It arrives wrapped in possibility. The same visitor who would be greeted casually in daylight can seem ominous at night. Darkness alters social interpretation before a word is spoken. This is also the setting in which many legends of intrusion take root. The unwanted visitor, the disguised stranger, the murderer at the threshold, the footsteps on the stair, the face at the pane. These images survive across centuries because they condense a basic human fear into recognizable form. The home, which is meant to be the final barrier against darkness, may not hold. What survives in storytelling traditions suggests that few fears are more potent than the collapse of interior safety. Once darkness enters the house, symbolically or literally, it feels as though the entire human arrangement has failed. There is no need to exaggerate this history into constant terror. Most nights in most settlements are ordinary. People sleep, work late, quarrel, make love, drink, pray, keep watch, and wake again. But routine is not the same as trust. The emotional tone of darkness is shaped by what could happen, not just by what usually does. Repeated stories of harm, even when rare, accumulate into expectation. The night becomes a container for social anxiety more broadly. Fear of strangers, fear of poverty, fear of disorder, fear of state weakness, fear of hidden desire, fear of rebellion. All of these can be projected into darkness because darkness conceals and therefore seems capable of containing them. In this sense, crime and panic do more than add a new source of fear to the night. They transform the meaning of the dark itself. It is no longer only a natural condition that exposes human frailty. It becomes a social mirror. Whatever a civilization most mistrusts, it begins to imagine moving after sunset. So the city closes its gates, lights its lamps, posts its watch, and still listens. Because the fear has matured now. It is no longer just fear of what lives beyond the fire. It is fear of what human beings may do when the fire cannot quite reach them. And that fear, once attached to darkness, proves extraordinarily difficult to remove, because every shadow in a settled world can now contain not just danger, but purpose, even without predators, spirits, or criminals. Darkness changes the body in ways that are difficult to ignore. The feeling that night is charged with danger does not come only from ancient memory or cultural inheritance. It also emerges from ordinary biology. As the sun goes down, the body begins to reorganize itself. Vision shifts, hormones rise and fall, temperature changes, attention moves differently. Fatigue presses against vigilance. The result is a state that is neither fully calm nor fully prepared, and in that unstable balance, darkness acquires much of its power. Human eyesight is central to this story. In bright conditions, the visual system is remarkably precise. Fine details, colours, facial expressions, small movements, and spatial depth can be read with extraordinary speed. But as light fades, this precision declines rapidly. The eye transitions away from colour-rich, detail-oriented daytime vision and toward a rougher system better suited to low light. Shapes remain, but edges soften. Motion is detected more easily than form. Peripheral vision becomes more important, though less exact. Colours drain away. Distance becomes harder to judge. What survives in the scientific record suggests that this shift is functional, but deeply limited. Humans are not natural masters of the night. We can adapt to darkness somewhat, but never comfortably enough to trust it. This matters because confidence depends on legibility. A body that cannot read the environment clearly begins to compensate in other ways. Hearing becomes more prominent. Small changes in sound attract more attention. A rustle that would go unnoticed by day now seems loaded with meaning. The brain, deprived of visual certainty, starts assigning greater value to fragments. A footstep on gravel, a change in breathing, a creak in wood, a distant animal call, each is pulled forward in awareness. Some of this is useful, some of it is misleading. In darkness, the body becomes more alert to signal but also more vulnerable to noise. There is a lesser-known reason this can feel so intense. The human auditory system does not simply detect sound, it constantly attempts to identify and localize it. At night, when visual confirmation is weak or absent, the brain has fewer ways to correct these guesses. A sound can seem nearer than it is, or farther away, or to come from the wrong direction entirely. Cool air, open spaces, enclosed walls, and changing wind all alter how sound travels. The evidence remains incomplete on how often such distortions directly shape night fear in everyday life. But the general principle is clear. Darkness forces the body to rely more heavily on senses that are useful, but not perfectly reliable, and uncertainty accumulates quickly. Then there is the chemistry of the evening. As light levels fall, the circadian system begins signaling the body that the active phase of the day is ending. Melatonin rises, alertness changes form, core body temperature slowly shifts. Muscles prepare for rest even while the environment may still require caution. This creates a strange contradiction. The body is being pulled towards sleep at precisely the time when darkness once demanded increased vigilance. For most of human history, this contradiction cannot be fully resolved. People must rest, but the night is also when perception worsens and vulnerability grows. What survives in the anthropological and physiological record suggests that humans solve this imperfectly through group living, shared watchfulness, and intermittent waking, but the tension remains built into the experience of night itself. This helps explain a common feeling that darkness brings not just fear, but fragility. At night, the body knows it is not operating at full strength. Reaction times may slow under fatigue, attention drifts more easily. Startle responses sharpen even as sustained concentration becomes harder. A person lying awake in the dark can feel both exhausted and unusually alert, a contradiction familiar to anyone who has listened too closely to sounds in the night. The nervous system is trying to do two opposing things at once: descend into rest and remain ready for interruption. That dual state is fertile ground for anxiety. The body also becomes more internally noticeable at night. In daylight, external tasks dominate attention. The body's small fluctuations, heartbeat, digestion, shifts in breathing, pressure in the chest, muscle twitches are often ignored. In darkness, especially in stillness, they become easier to notice and easier to misinterpret. A strong heartbeat can feel alarmingly loud. A small spasm can suggest approach. A momentary breath catch can be read as threat. Scholars still debate the exact boundary between ordinary nocturnal awareness and anxiety-driven hypervigilance. But what survives in clinical observation suggests that night gives the body more opportunity to hear itself, and the brain more opportunity to misunderstand what it hears. This bodily awareness is especially powerful when combined with reduced visual certainty. During the day, a person who feels a spike of adrenaline can quickly scan the surroundings, identify likely causes, and settle. At night, the same surge may arrive into ambiguity. The environment remains unclear. The internal alarm has no obvious target. The mind therefore starts searching harder, and harder searching often generates more alarming possibilities. This sequence can become circular. A sound causes a small rise in tension. Tension sharpens bodily awareness. Bodily awareness confirms that something is wrong. The lack of clear evidence outside keeps the cycle open. The hormonal side of this experience is subtle but important. Stress systems do not switch off simply because the sun is gone. Cortisol patterns change across the day, but acute stress reactions can still rise quickly at night, especially when triggered by uncertainty. Adrenaline mobilizes the body fast, increasing heart rate, sharpening attention, and preparing muscles for action. In daylight, this often feels like readiness. In darkness, with nowhere clear to direct it, it can feel like dread. No single explanation fully accounts for the emotional intensity of nighttime fear, but this mismatch between activation and clear information is one of its strongest components. There is also the issue of posture and vulnerability. Much of nighttime fear is experienced while lying down, half covered, partially immobile, or preparing for sleep. This is a very different physical state from standing, moving, and engaging the world in daylight. The reclining body is less ready to flee, less ready to fight, and more dependent on early warning. A sound heard while walking can be investigated. The same sound heard from bed feels different because the body is already in a compromised position. What survives in the history of sleep arrangement suggests that many cultures respond to this vulnerability with collective sleeping, enclosed spaces, raised platforms, nearby fires, or protective rituals. The body knows, in its own quiet way, that sleep invites risk. Night also alters the emotional tone of memory and thought. Fatigue makes cognition less disciplined. Unresolved worries, grief, regret, and anticipatory fear often become larger after dark, not because they are objectively more important, but because competing stimuli have fallen away. The environment quiets, the body slows, the mind fills the vacant space. A person who feels calm enough by day may lie awake at night haunted by possibilities that seem almost absurd the next morning. This tendency may not be universal in the same form for every person, but it is widespread enough to suggest that darkness does not merely conceal the outer world, it rearranges the inner one. That inner rearrangement feeds back into perception. A worried mind hears the same sound differently. A grieving mind experiences empty darkness as more inhabited. A lonely mind feels the distance between bodies more sharply at night than by day. The body, in other words, does not approach darkness as a neutral instrument. It arrives already altered by hormone cycles, sensory limits, fatigue, posture, and emotion. Darkness lands on a moving system, not a stable one. This may be why artificial light, though enormously powerful, never fully solves the problem. A lamp can illuminate the room, but it cannot remove fatigue. A streetlight can expose the pavement, but it cannot stop the body from hearing sudden noise as significant. A bedside glow can soften shadows, but it cannot entirely silence the old tension between sleep and vigilance. Modern life reduces some of the environmental risks of night, often dramatically, but the body still passes through its evening transformations. The ancient conditions may be gone, the physiological architecture remains. And so, after sunset, the body enters a familiar compromise. It sees less and listens more. It grows tired and more easily startled. It lies down while trying not to be surprised. It notices its own heartbeat, its own breath, its own tension. It waits for sleep while remaining prepared, however imperfectly, for interruption. This is not superstition. It is not weakness. It is the ordinary biology of a creature whose survival once depended on enduring long hours of reduced control. Darkness feels dangerous in part because the body itself becomes a little less certain, a little less capable, a little more dependent on guesswork and collective safety. By the time the mind adds stories, memories, and inherited fears, the body has already done most of the work. It has quietly announced that night is different. That visibility has thinned. That rest is necessary. That rest is risky. And that in the dark, even before anything happens, a human being is already living closer to the edge of uncertainty. By the time human beings learn to flood streets, homes, factories, and entire skylines with artificial light, the old authority of darkness should, in theory, be broken. Night no longer arrives as a full seizure of the world. It arrives interrupted, diluted, delayed. Lamps glow behind glass. Roads shine under rows of electric bulbs. Cities throw their own weather of light upward into the sky, erasing stars and softening the blackness that once seemed endless. A person can walk after sunset and still read signs, recognize faces, find the edge of the pavement, and return home without touching true dark at all. And yet the fear remains. This is one of the most revealing facts in the whole story. If darkness were only a practical problem of visibility, then modern lighting should have solved most of it. In many ways it has. Predation is rare in most built environments. Streets can be monitored, homes can be secured, flashlights fit in a pocket. A switch can turn midnight into something close to noon. What survives in modern psychological research, however, suggests that none of this has fully erased the emotional force of darkness. It has changed its triggers, reduced some of its dangers, and narrowed its territory. But it has not removed the deeper response. Part of the reason is simple. Artificial light is powerful, but selective. It does not abolish darkness, it fragments it. A city at night is not truly bright in any absolute sense. It is a chain of illuminated surfaces surrounded by shadow. A house with lamps on still contains closets, stairwells, corners, reflections, windows, and spaces beyond the walls. A road lit by streetlights still has the dark between one pool of light and the next. Even the most electrified life is full of controlled visibility rather than total visibility. The mind notices those boundaries immediately. This means the modern world has not replaced darkness with continuous safety. It has merely made the edges more precise. One can stand in a well-lit room and feel secure, then look through a window into the yard and feel the old uncertainty return almost at once. One can walk beneath streetlights and still feel uneasy passing a park, an alley, a stairwell, an unlit door, or the stretch of road where the lamps thin out. The contrast may even sharpen the emotional effect. A brightly lit environment makes the remaining darkness feel more intentional, more separate, almost as though it belongs to something outside the human order. There is a lesser-known irony here. Artificial light may reduce danger, but it can also preserve hypervigilance by keeping people active during hours when the body still expects rest. In pre-industrial conditions, darkness strongly limits movement and social activity. In modern life, that limit weakens. People commute late, work at night, shop after sunset, travel across cities, stare at screens, and remain psychologically stimulated deep into the hours that once belonged mostly to sleep and guarded stillness. The evidence remains incomplete on all the cultural consequences of this shift, but one pattern is clear. Modern lighting expands opportunity while also stretching the nervous system across hours it did not originally evolve to manage in the same way. No single explanation fully accounts for why fear of darkness persists under these conditions, but several layers appear to overlap. The first is biological inertia. Systems built over immense spans of time do not vanish because a technology arrives quickly. The human nervous system still responds to low visibility with caution, even when the environment has changed. The second is developmental continuity. Children still learn the shape of darkness early, still encounter the same bodily uncertainty, still receive cultural cues about what night might contain. The third is symbolic inheritance. Generations raised on stories, warnings, crimes, images, and memories attached to the dark do not approach it as blank space. They approach it already narrated. Modernity adds a fourth layer mismatch. A person may rationally know that the lit apartment, the monitored parking lot, or the suburban bedroom is safe, while the ancient systems beneath that knowledge remain only partly convinced. The result is not ignorance, but friction. One part of the mind says there is nothing here. Another notices the hallway beyond the bedroom, the black reflection in the window, the basement stairs descending into unlit space, and reacts before language catches up. The modern self then performs a familiar ritual of correction. It turns on another light, checks the lock, looks once into the dark room, glances under the bed, confirms what it already knew, and feels relief that is slightly out of proportion to the actual risk. That disproportion is the clue. It tells us the fear is not being generated in the moment by evidence alone. It is being inherited from older calibrations of risk. Technology also changes what darkness means socially. In a brightly lit society, darkness can start to signal not only danger, but neglect. A broken street lamp, an abandoned building, an unlit underpass, a train platform with poor visibility. These places feel threatening partly because they seem outside maintenance, outside surveillance, outside ordinary care. The fear may be less about literal blackness than about the suggestion that human systems of order are weaker here. What survives in urban studies and environmental psychology suggests that lighting strongly affects perceived safety for this reason. People often trust lit spaces not merely because they can see better, but because light implies attention, occupancy, and social investment. Darkness implies the opposite. This is a significant transformation. Ancient humans fear the dark because nature regains the advantage. Modern humans often fear it because human order appears to be retreating. The emotional structure is remarkably similar. In both cases, darkness marks a zone where control weakens and vulnerability increases. Only the surrounding civilization has changed. Screens complicate the matter in quieter ways. Modern people spend enormous portions of life surrounded by artificial brightness, especially at close range. This does not make darkness irrelevant. It may make the contrast harsher. After hours of illuminated interiors and glowing devices, a genuinely dark environment can feel unusually abrupt, even confrontational. The eye, adapted to constant light, recovers slowly. The mind, accustomed to perpetual visual input, finds emptiness harder to tolerate. Scholars still debate the full psychological consequences of modern light saturation, but it may help explain why many people remain deeply uncomfortable in darkness, despite rarely encountering serious physical danger there. The problem is not merely ancient fear surviving unchanged. It is ancient fear meeting a life that has become less practiced at darkness. There's also the fact that artificial light never truly addresses the oldest uncertainty, what may be present beyond what can currently be seen. A flashlight illuminates only where it is pointed. A porch light reveals the entrance, not the far yard. Headlights expose the road ahead, but emphasize the blackness beyond their reach. In some settings, technology almost stages darkness theatrically, throwing narrow beams into large fields of obscurity and making the unseen more dramatic than before. A person walking with a flashlight through a forest, basement, or blackout zone may feel even more aware of darkness precisely because the small cone of light demonstrates how little is actually visible. What survives in modern behavior confirms this persistence. People still sleep with lamps on. Children still ask for night lights. Adults still hesitate before entering an unlit room. Horror films still rely on darkness more than almost any other device, because darkness remains one of the fastest ways to activate expectation of threat. Emergency power failures still produce unease out of proportion to the practical inconvenience, especially in cities where people are unused to the world becoming visually uncertain all at once. Before anything dangerous occurs, the body understands the message the systems that hold the night at bay have faltered. And that may be the deeper truth of modern light. It has not destroyed fear of darkness. It has become the ritual by which modern people keep that fear manageable. Light is reassurance made visible. It says the world is still organized, that surfaces can be read, that others are likely nearby, that hidden movement is less likely to go unnoticed. When the light fails, the reassurance fails with it, and ancient responses rise very quickly through modern habits. So the illuminated world is not the end of the story, only a new chapter in it. Humans build brighter cities, stronger homes, longer working days, and more powerful tools. They push back the dark with switches, grids, batteries, sensors, and glass. They succeed so well that many rarely meet true darkness at all. But the nervous system remembers. It still reads low visibility as vulnerability. It still notices the edge of every lamplit space. It still reacts to the sudden failure of light as though something much older has returned. And perhaps that is why darkness remains so emotionally potent in modern life. It is not just the absence of illumination. It is the temporary exposure of a truth most technologies can only cover. Never erase that beneath the bright surfaces of civilization. The human mind is still built for a world in which night changes the terms of survival. The old fear becomes easiest to understand when modern people lose the protections they no longer notice. It is one thing to say that darkness no longer rules human life as it once did. It is another to stand in a city during a blackout and feel the familiar architecture of confidence begin to loosen within minutes. Elevators stop. Screens go dead. Streetlights vanish. Windows become black squares. The ordinary hum of systems falls away. And with it goes a layer of reassurance so constant that it is usually invisible. No predator has arrived. No supernatural force has crossed the threshold. Yet something unmistakable changes in the body. The world feels less governed. This reaction is often immediate. People speak more quietly. They listen harder. They move more slowly through spaces that were effortless only moments earlier. Hallways lengthen, stairwells deepen. Outside, shapes merge into one another. Inside, rooms, once defined by lamp glow, retreat into ambiguous edges. What survives in accounts of large power failures suggests that many people experience the first stage not as panic, but as disorientation. They are not yet facing any specific threat. They are facing the return of uncertainty. And uncertainty, as the old nervous system understands perfectly well, is never minor. A blackout is especially revealing because it strips modern darkness of romance. There is no chosen candlelit mood here, no controlled dimness, no dramatic entertainment. Instead, there is interruption. The world does not gently become dark. It ceases to function in expected ways. Refrigerators fall silent. Traffic signals fail. Familiar landmarks disappear into shadow. Even where moonlight or starlight remains, it rarely feels sufficient. Artificial illumination has trained the iron mind to expect a level of legibility that natural night cannot match. When that expectation collapses, the species rediscovers very quickly how dependent it has become on light not only for seeing, but for feeling that life remains organized. There is a lesser-known detail in many blackout accounts. People often become unusually aware of distance. A short walk home feels longer, a stairwell seems deeper. The gap between one building and another takes on weight. This is partly sensory and partly psychological. Darkness removes the small visual confirmations that normally keep space manageable. The ground is still there, the road still the same length. But without continuous visual proof, the body begins to treat distance as more consequential. It is the ancient mathematics of risk returning beneath modern habit. Caves expose a different version of the same truth. In a cave, darkness is not the darkness of open night. It has no horizon. It does not thin towards stars or moonlight. It swallows direction altogether. A person may stand still underground and find that the mind, deprived of visual anchor, begins to drift almost immediately. Left and right lose conviction. Time behaves strangely. Sound reflects in ways that make space difficult to judge. The hand in front of the face becomes theoretical rather than visible. What survives in the record of cave exploration and human use of deep subterranean spaces suggests that even experienced people can find such darkness unusually destabilizing. This is important because caves appear throughout human history as both refuge and threshold. They shelter the body and unsettle the mind. They preserve traces of ritual, burial, art, and habitation. Yet they also intensify some of the oldest sensations connected to darkness. The evidence remains incomplete on exactly how prehistoric people emotionally experienced the deepest cave zones, but no single explanation fully accounts for the repeated human attraction to such spaces. They are hidden, protected, acoustically strange, and visually absolute. They may have offered safety from weather or enemies, yet they also place human beings inside a form of darkness more complete than ordinary night. The cave does not merely contain shadow, it seems to generate another order of reality. Forests do something similar above ground. A modern person entering dense woods after sunset may be carrying a phone, a flashlight, proper clothing, and all the rational assurances of contemporary life. Yet the old reaction appears with surprising speed. Paths disappear. Trunks become ranks of vertical shapes too similar to distinguish. The eye keeps reporting movement that may only be leaves shifting in wind. Sounds arrive from several directions at once. A snapped twig feels less like a noise than a message. The mind starts trying to build a map and cannot quite hold it. What survives in human storytelling is full of forests for this reason. They are one of the last common environments where darkness still behaves something like it used to: thick, directional, inhabited by hidden life, indifferent to human certainty. Oceans produce another variation, perhaps even stranger. On open water at night, darkness removes not only nearby detail but stable reference points altogether. The land vanishes, the horizon may disappear, up and down remain, but forward becomes abstract. Even in calm conditions, the body loses the easy reassurance of fixed terrain. Sailors, fishers, naval crews, and those who travel by sea have long known that night over water carries a special psychological charge. The vessel becomes a small lit island in a surrounding void, a return to the oldest human geometry of safety and darkness. Beyond the railing lies depth that cannot be judged, and movement that cannot be tracked. The sea at night combines concealed life, unstable footing, altered sound, and overwhelming scale. It is difficult to imagine a setting more perfectly suited to activate ancient vigilance. The same is true, in another register, of deserts after dark. Daylight presents the desert as exposure and heat, a place of distance made visible. Night turns it into something else entirely. Temperature falls, landmarks flatten, vast ground disappears into monochrome space. The silence may become so complete that the smallest sound feels amplified beyond proportion. Travellers in such landscapes have long described the strange emotional effect of night there, a mixture of beauty, insignificance, and unease. What survives in the record suggests that darkness in open, empty places can be as unsettling as darkness in crowded or enclosed ones, though for different reasons. In forests and cities, fear comes from concealment nearby. In deserts and seas, it comes from scale and the loss of human reference. All of these environments reveal something modern interiors often hide. Human confidence depends heavily on repeated environmental confirmation. Walls, lights, furniture, streets, and familiar noise tell the brain where it is and what kind of world it occupies. Remove enough of those confirmations, and the older systems begin to reassert themselves. A person may still reason perfectly well. They may know the cave has an exit, the blackout will end, the forest trail leads back, the boat is sound. But the body reacts to conditions, not only to knowledge. It notices the collapse of reliable visibility, the weakening of orientation, the possibility of hidden approach, the difficulty of escape, and it begins once again to weight the world toward threat. This is why even seasoned adults can suddenly feel like children in total darkness. Competence narrows, humour fades, movements become careful, voices lower, people stay closer together. The social instincts sharpen almost immediately. One flashlight becomes everyone's concern. One person who knows the route matters more than usual. One strange sound can redirect the attention of the whole group. What survives in observations of outdoor accidents, caving incidents, and blacked-out urban moments suggest that darkness still reorganizes human behavior collectively, not just individually. It compresses the social body back toward older patterns of caution, leadership, clustering, and mutual dependence. There is no need to exaggerate this into helplessness. Humans can function in the dark, adapt to it, even become skilled within it. But skill does not erase the underlying stress of reduced control. Night navigation, cave descent, forest movement, open water travel, power failure response. These all require techniques precisely because darkness changes the terms of action. Training matters because the ancient reaction is real. It must be managed, not mocked. And perhaps that is the most revealing point. The fear of darkness survives not because modern people are irrational, but because certain environments can still strip away the illusion that light permanently solves the problem. A blackout, a cave, a deep forest, a moonless shoreline, an empty road far from habitation. These places remind the body that civilization is often a surface condition. Remove enough structure, and the old contract returns. The world becomes harder to read. Movement becomes more costly. Sound becomes suspicious. Near and far lose clarity. The mind fills gaps faster. The group tightens if there is a group to tighten around. In those moments, the species meets itself again. Not the brightly lit version, surrounded by switches and schedules and always on screens, but the older one. The one that measures safety in small circles of visibility. The one that distrusts space it cannot map. The one that hears something in the dark and assumes, before evidence arrives, that assuming the worst may still be the safer choice. That older self has never disappeared. It has only been waiting behind the infrastructure, quiet while the lights hold, and when the lights fail, or when the world grows dark enough to resemble its original form, it steps forward almost instantly, as if no time at all has passed. Even when darkness no longer contains much real danger, the stories remain. In some ways they become stronger. Once a fear is old enough, it no longer needs direct experience to survive. It can travel through myth, religion, custom, art, literature, rumour, and entertainment, moving from one generation to the next as a kind of emotional inheritance. By the time modern people enter a dark room and feel the first quick tension at the back of the neck, they're not responding only with ancient biology. They're also responding with centuries of narrative. This is one of the most powerful things human culture does. It takes vague unease and gives it form. It teaches people not just that the dark is unsettling, but what kind of presence might be waiting there. A culture can turn shadow into an ancestor, a demon, a prowler, a witch, a ghost, a beast, a curse, a test from God, a sign of moral danger, or a place where the buried past returns. The names change constantly. The emotional machinery beneath them changes very little. What survives across religious traditions makes this especially clear. Darkness is often associated with judgment, exile, ignorance, temptation, impurity, or the nearness of hostile spiritual forces. Light, by contrast, becomes truth, safety, revelation, blessing, and divine order. These oppositions are not universal in every detail, and scholars still debate how much they arise from environmental experience versus broader symbolic thinking, but the pattern is unmistakable. Human beings repeatedly moralize darkness. It doesn't remain merely inconvenient, it becomes a condition with ethical weight. This matters because moralized fear lasts longer than practical fear. A child who is told that the dark contains uneven ground or dangerous animals may grow up and revise those beliefs with experience. A child who absorbs the darker lesson that night belongs to wickedness, corruption, punishment, or invisible watchers receives something more durable. The darkness is no longer just unsafe. It becomes wrong in some deeper sense, charged with meanings that reason cannot easily clear away. Folklore sharpens this effect, unlike formal religion, which often places darkness within a larger cosmology. Folklore thrives on the local, the intimate, and the immediate. It gives the dark a particular road, a certain tree, a bend in the river, a room in the house, a woman who appears at crossroads, a figure that asks to be let in, footsteps that follow but never arrive, a face seen only once from the edge of a field. What survives in folk traditions from many parts of the world suggests that darkness is almost never left anonymous. It acquires residence. It becomes geographically specific. The village knows where not to go after sunset. The house knows which stair creaks for the wrong reason. The path knows where voices should not be answered. There is a lesser-known strength in these stories. They're memorable because they compress useful caution into vivid form. A dangerous marsh becomes haunted. A treacherous road becomes cursed. A deep forest becomes inhabited by something that punishes wandering children. Scholars remain cautious about reducing all folklore to practical lessons, because much of it clearly does more than preserve safety advice. It expresses grief, desire, social anxiety, and cosmic order as well. Still, what survives in the record suggests that many stories do double work. They entertain, frighten, and moralize. But they also teach where danger lies. Once storytelling traditions mature, darkness becomes culturally productive. It is no longer just feared, it is used. It becomes one of the most reliable settings for suspense, revelation, transgression, and return. The dead visit at night because night is when they make emotional sense. The monster appears after dark because darkness denies clear sight and grants dramatic approach. Secret lovers meet under cover of night because daylight belongs to witnesses and rules. Heroes travel through darkness because darkness is the proper landscape for trial. Villains operate there because concealment flatters intent. Again and again, culture returns to the same arrangement the night is, where ordinary certainty fails, and therefore where transformation becomes possible. This arrangement carries easily into later literature and modern media. Gothic fiction fills houses, castles, monasteries, ruins, and landscapes with shadow, not because darkness is decorative, but because darkness accelerates uncertainty. Horror inherits the same logic with extraordinary efficiency. A bright hallway can be unsettling under the right conditions, but a dark hallway does much of the work by itself. A face seen clearly is one thing. A face partially seen, or perhaps not seen at all, activates the older predictive machinery of the brain. What modern cinema, fiction, and digital media exploit so effectively is not a new fear, but an old one that culture has refined for thousands of years. No single explanation fully accounts for why certain dark images recur so consistently in modern storytelling, but several stand out. One is concealment. Darkness allows delayed recognition, and delayed recognition is one of the oldest engines of fear. Another is ambiguity. The audience, like the frightened person in the scene, does not know whether a threat is present, and uncertainty itself becomes the tension. A third is participation. Darkness forces the viewer or reader to imagine what cannot yet be confirmed, and imagined threats are often more potent than revealed ones. The mind joins the story by filling the shadows. This is why cultural fear of darkness can intensify even in safe environments. A person raised on centuries of inherited night imagery may encounter very little real darkness and still feel its force strongly. Stories have prepared the nervous system in advance. They have stocked the shadow with expected content. The hallway is not just dark, it is the kind of place where something appears in stories. The window at night is not just reflective glass, it is a threshold that culture has taught people to distrust. The bedroom corner is not empty space, it is a stage waiting for whatever old narrative the mind has learned best. Religion, folklore, and horror do not all operate in the same register. Of course, some traditions place darkness within reverence rather than pure fear. The night can be holy, contemplative, necessary for visions, or linked to divine mystery rather than evil alone. Mystics, monks, and contemplative traditions sometimes enter darkness deliberately to confront the limits of ordinary perception. But even here, darkness is rarely casual. It remains potent precisely because it strips away ordinary human control. Whether one names that experience terrifying or sacred often depends on context, training, and belief. The emotional intensity is often similar. This may be why modern people, even those who reject supernatural belief, continue to respond so strongly to dark symbolism. The surface doctrine can change while the deeper structure remains. One need not literally believe in ghosts to feel uneasy about a dark staircase. One need not accept demons to dislike a shape at the bedroom door. One need not endorse folklore to feel the force of an old warning when passing an unlit tree line at night. The stories have already done their work. They have taught the mind what darkness is for. And perhaps more importantly, they have taught the mind that darkness remembers. It remembers the dead. It remembers crimes. It remembers punishments, disappearances, betrayals, and all the things people prefer not to see clearly. This is part of why darkness in culture so often attracts the past. Ancient wrongs rise in it. Buried truths return in it. Unfinished grief finds its voice there. The dark becomes a natural setting for whatever civilization has failed to resolve in daylight. What survives in art and narrative suggests that night is not only feared as future threat, but as historical return. It brings back what was hidden. That function keeps darkness permanently relevant. Even in an age of LEDs, cameras, and illuminated screens, the shadow remains culturally crowded. Horror films still depend on it because the audience does. Religious imagery still leans on it because the contrast with light remains emotionally legible. Folklore survives online, in urban legends and whispered stories retold with modern details but ancient mechanics. A figure at the end of the bed, a woman on the roadside, a face in the window. A voice from the hallway. The technologies change. The architecture of fear does not. So the stories continue to keep the fear alive, but not by inventing it from nothing. They nourish it. They refine it. They pass it on with names, images, and settings vivid enough to outlast the dangers that first helped create it. And by doing so, they ensure that the dark is never just dark. It arrives already inhabited by memory, morality, rumour, and expectation. The body may supply the first tension, but culture fills in the details, teaching each generation not only to fear the shadows, but to recognize what kind of shadow they have inherited. By now, the fear of darkness has accumulated too many layers to be explained by any single field of study. It sits at the intersection of biology, environment, culture, memory, and individual experience, and each discipline that approaches it finds part of the answer but not the whole. Scientists attempt to isolate mechanisms, historians trace patterns, anthropologists compare traditions, psychologists map responses, and neuroscientists identify circuits and chemicals. Together, they assemble a picture that is detailed, compelling, and still incomplete. From a biological perspective, the explanation seems straightforward at first. Humans are visually dominant creatures living in a world where vision fails at night. Reduced visibility leads to increased uncertainty, which activates threat detection systems. These systems bias perception toward danger because the cost of underestimating risk is higher than the cost of overestimating it. This framework is supported by a wide range of evidence, from laboratory studies of perception to evolutionary models of survival. It explains why darkness feels inherently risky even in safe conditions. But this explanation does not account for everything. It does not fully explain why specific images, faces in shadows, figures at the edge of the bed, watchers behind glass appear so consistently across cultures. It does not fully explain why some individuals experience intense fear in conditions that others tolerate easily. It does not fully explain why fear of darkness often blends with moral or existential unease, rather than remaining purely physical. The biological account is necessary, but not sufficient. Psychology adds another layer by focusing on how the mind interprets uncertainty. Research shows that under conditions of low sensory input, the brain becomes more likely to generate patterns, infer agency, and misattribute internal experiences to external sources. This aligns closely with what people report in darkness, the sense of being watched, the misinterpretation of sounds, the vividness of imagined presence, cognitive biases toward threat detection, combined with the brain's predictive nature, help explain why darkness so easily becomes populated with meaning. Yet psychology, too, leaves gaps. It can describe how fear operates, but it struggles to explain why certain symbolic forms persist across generations. It can measure responses, but it cannot fully account for why the dark becomes linked to morality, the supernatural, or the past in such consistent ways. These associations require cultural context. Anthropology and history provide that context. They show how different societies interpret darkness, how they ritualize it, how they embed it in belief systems and social structures. They reveal patterns that repeat across continents and centuries, the association of night with danger, transformation, secrecy, and the unseen, the use of light as both practical tool and symbolic protection, the emergence of stories that give shape to fear. What survives in the comparative record suggests that while the details vary widely, the underlying structure remains remarkably stable. Still, even this broader view cannot close the case. Because human experience is not only collective but individual. Two people can stand in the same darkness and feel entirely different things. One may feel calm, even comforted, while the other feels exposed, tense, alert. Personal history matters. A person who has experienced danger at night may carry that memory forward. A person raised with strong cultural warnings about darkness may feel its weight more heavily. A person accustomed to outdoor environments may navigate night with greater ease than someone whose life has been almost entirely illuminated. The evidence remains incomplete on how these factors interact, but their influence is clear. No single explanation fully accounts for the persistence and complexity of fear of darkness, because it is not a single phenomenon. It is a convergence. Biology prepares the body to treat low visibility as risk. Psychology amplifies uncertainty into imagined threat. Culture provides images, meanings, and expectations. History reinforces those expectations through repeated narrative. Personal experience selects which elements become most vivid. Together, these layers create something more durable than any one of them alone. There is also a deeper question that science approaches but does not fully resolve. Why does darkness so often feel not just dangerous, but significant? Why does it carry a sense of presence even when nothing is there? Some researchers suggest that this reflects the brain's sensitivity to agency, a tendency to assume that unseen forces may be intentional. Others point to the role of attention and memory, arguing that darkness allows unresolved thoughts and emotions to surface more strongly. Still others emphasize the sensory deprivation aspect, noting that the absence of input invites the mind to generate its own content. Each of these explanations has merit. None of them completely settles the matter. Part of the difficulty lies in the nature of the experience itself. Fear of darkness is not purely cognitive. It is embodied. It is felt in the chest, in the breath, in the tension of muscles, in the urge to look again, to listen again, to confirm what cannot be confirmed. It resists clean separation into categories because it operates across them simultaneously. The mind knows one thing, the body prepares for another. The environment provides too little information to reconcile the two quickly. This unresolved state may be the key. Darkness does not simply threaten. It suspends certainty. And human beings, for all their intelligence and adaptation, remain deeply uncomfortable in suspended states. They prefer clear signals, stable patterns, reliable feedback. Darkness offers none of these in full. It reduces clarity without removing the need for judgment. It demands decisions in the absence of evidence. It asks the brain to operate under conditions it can manage, but never entirely master. This is why attempts to explain away fear of darkness often fail at an emotional level. Saying that there is nothing there does not address the deeper issue, which is that the brain is not designed to wait for proof under uncertain conditions. It is designed to act first and refine later. Darkness is one of the environments where that design becomes most visible. Modern science can map the circuits involved. It can identify the amygdala's role in threat detection, the visual cortex's limitations in low light, the hormonal shifts that accompany evening, the cognitive biases that shape interpretation. It can show, in detail, how the system works. But knowing how a system works is not the same as removing its effects. The fear persists not because it is misunderstood, but because it is functional. It is a response to a condition that has mattered for most of human existence. Even when the condition changes, the response remains calibrated to its older form. And so science arrives at a careful conclusion. Darkness feels dangerous because, for a very long time, it was. The brain learned that lesson deeply. It continues to apply it broadly. It refines it with culture, memory, and experience. It occasionally misfires, generating fear where none is needed. But from its own perspective, it is doing exactly what it was shaped to do, reducing the chance of catastrophic error in a world that cannot always be seen clearly. In that sense, fear of darkness is not a mistake to be corrected. It is a strategy. An imperfect one, certainly, shaped by conditions that no longer always apply, but still active, still persuasive, still ready to surface whenever the world grows dim enough to resemble the environment in which it was first learned. And that is why, even with all the knowledge available today, the final explanation remains slightly out of reach. Because the question is not only what darkness is, it is what it has been. And what it has been, for most of the human story, is a place where certainty fails, and where the cost of failure has always been too high to ignore. After all the fires, the walls, the gods, the stories, the lamps, the watches, the locked doors, the streetlights, and the screens, the fear remains because it is no longer merely about darkness. It is about what darkness reveals when light withdraws. Not the shapes of hidden things alone, but the structure of human life itself. How dependent it is on visibility. How fragile certainty becomes when that visibility weakens. How quickly the modern mind, for all its tools and explanations, can still feel the old animal truth rising underneath it. This is the last and perhaps most unsettling part of the story. Fear of the dark survives not simply because human beings once faced predators at night, or because children still imagine figures in the corner, or because crime and folklore have clothed the shadows with meaning. It survives because darkness continues to expose a limit that no civilization has ever fully removed. Human beings do not like being unable to see far enough to know what kind of world they are in. They do not like being reminded that much of their calm depends on conditions that can fail. What survives in the long record of human behavior suggests that darkness has always functioned as a kind of test, not a moral test in the narrow sense, though many cultures describe it that way, but a more fundamental one. It tests whether the world remains stable when evidence thins out. It tests whether the body can rest while danger is still imaginable. It tests whether a person can tolerate uncertainty without filling it completely with threat. And because the answer is never perfect, the night continues to matter. There is a reason so many people speak of darkness as though it were alive. Strictly speaking, it is not. It has no intention, no will, no hunger of its own. It is only the condition created when light falls away. And yet the emotional experience of darkness so often feels active rather than passive. It presses, it gathers, it approaches, it waits. This language is not random. It reflects the way human perception responds when control weakens. The mind, shaped to detect agency under uncertainty, gives the darkness the qualities of a presence because presence is easier to fear than emptiness. But perhaps emptiness is part of the problem too. Darkness removes detail, and with detail goes reassurance. The ordinary anchors of life faces, distances, exits, textures, pathways, boundaries begin to loosen. The world grows simpler in the wrong way. It becomes less informative without becoming less important. Human beings must still move through it, sleep within it, raise children in it, bury their dead under it, cross water through it, defend homes during it, grieve in it, dream inside it, and listen to whatever reaches them from beyond the edge of sight. The dark remains emotionally powerful because it strips the world down to conditions in which the mind is forced to remember how much of safety is interpretation held together by enough visible proof. This is why the fear persists even among those who understand it well. Knowledge helps, but knowledge does not erase calibration. An archaeologist can know the history of ancient night and still feel uneasy in a moonless field. A neuroscientist can explain sleep paralysis and still recoil from waking into the sense of a presence in the room. A historian can trace centuries of night myths and still find an unlit corridor more difficult to cross after midnight than at noon. The evidence remains incomplete on the exact balance between reason and reflex in each person, but what survives in common experience suggests a simple fact. Explanation lives on top of reaction, not in place of it. There is also the matter of scale. Human beings are comfortable when the world feels proportionate to their bodies and plans. Daylight helps create that feeling. It makes distances legible and places human action into visible relation with the land, the street, the room, the sea, the mountain, the sky. Darkness disrupts that proportion. A room may feel larger than it is, a hallway feels longer, a field becomes boundless, a forest becomes endless. The ocean at night becomes almost impossible to measure. This distortion does not merely frighten, it humbles. It reminds the human organism that it is small, localized, and heavily dependent on environmental feedback. That reminder may be one reason darkness has so often been associated not only with fear, but with awe. What overwhelms the senses can terrify and enlarge thought at the same time. The stars seen from true darkness can produce wonder precisely because the ground below remains uncertain. A person looks upward into magnificent scale while remaining bodily aware of immediate vulnerability. This doubleness may explain why darkness has never been reduced to a single meaning. It is too rich for that. It can be sacred, dangerous, intimate, lawless, fertile, haunted, restful, and unbearable, sometimes within the same hour. Still, beneath all those meanings lies the old structure. Darkness reduces control. Reduced control increases vigilance. Vigilance, sustained long enough, becomes fear. No single explanation fully accounts for how that fear settles into each life, but its persistence across time suggests something deeper than custom alone. It is part of the inheritance of being human. Not every person feels it with the same force. Not every environment evokes it equally. Some find darkness comforting, even protective, because it hides them from the world rather than hiding the world from them. Others feel it most strongly only in certain places: woods, stairwells, open water, basements, hotel rooms, roads with no houses. But variation does not cancel the pattern. It shows how flexible the fear has become while still preserving its original shape. The last shadow we carry, then, is not simply fear of the unseen. It is memory without words, a biological memory, a cultural memory, a historical memory layered so deeply that it often feels immediate rather than inherited. The body remembers that once the night changed everything. Culture remembers and keeps retelling the lesson. Civilization remembers by building lights against it. Childhood remembers first and has to be slowly taught not to trust every shadow. And adulthood, for all its competence, never entirely forgets. That may be why darkness still feels personal. It does not just hide objects. It rearranges the relationship between the self and the world. In bright conditions, the self feels outward-facing, competent, interpretive, in command of movement. In darkness, the self contracts. It listens more than it sees. It feels the limits of its own reach. It becomes aware of the body as something exposed, temporary, and not fully informed. Fear enters there, but so does truth of a particular kind. Because the fear of darkness is, in the end, a fear of vulnerability made visible by invisibility. It is the recognition that human beings have never been as self-sufficient as they like to imagine, that their confidence depends on light more than they admit, that civilization is partly a long effort to widen the circle around the fire, and that beyond that circle, whether in the woods, beneath the sea, inside a cave, in a powerless city, in a child's room, or behind the eyes of a waking dream, there remains a space where the older rules still wait. The lights may hold, the stories may change, the explanations may grow more refined, but somewhere in the nervous system, unchanged by all of it, the ancient calculation is still being made. If you cannot see clearly, assume caution. If the world has gone uncertain, do not relax too soon. If the dark has returned, remember what it once meant. And so the fear endures, not as a defect, not as a childish leftover, but as one of the oldest surviving instructions in the human mind when the light fails. You are entering a condition your ancestors learned to respect at great cost. That lesson, carried across tens of thousands of nights, still lives within the species, quiet in daylight, patient at dusk, and fully awake the moment the world grows hard to read. The fear does not end because morning comes, it only recedes, as it always has, back into the quieter parts of the mind where ancient lessons wait without speaking. Daylight returns the world to order. Edges sharpen, distances behave, faces can be read again, paths become simple, rooms become ordinary. The same hallway that felt charged at midnight becomes just a hallway once more. The same trees that seemed watchful in the dark become trunks and leaves in plain light. And yet nothing essential has changed except illumination. The world was always itself. It was the human relationship to it that shifted. That may be the deepest point of all. Darkness has always been powerful, not because it transforms reality, but because it reveals how much of reality human beings require light to trust. For most of history, that dependence is not a minor inconvenience. It is a condition of survival. The night teaches caution, closeness, ritual, memory. It teaches the value of fire, of walls, of companions nearby, of listening carefully, of waiting for dawn. Civilizations rise, technologies brighten, and the old conditions are softened almost beyond recognition. But some part of the lesson remains. It remains in the child who asks for a lamp. It remains in the adult who glances twice into a dark room before stepping inside. It remains in the hush that falls over a city when the power suddenly disappears. Across thousands of generations, human beings learn how to live longer, build farther, think more precisely, and explain more of the world. But they do not become creatures for whom darkness is nothing. They remain what they have long been: animals of the fire's edge, dependent on circles of visibility, carrying within them a memory of nights when the unseen was not metaphor, but risk. That memory survives in the nervous system, in stories, in architecture, in prayer, in bedtime routine, in the instinct to gather close when the world grows unreadable. And perhaps that is why the dark still feels so old. Not simply old in history, but old in us. It reaches backward through childhood, through cities, through myths, through the long prehistory of camps and predators and uncertain ground, until it touches something near the beginning. A human being stands at the threshold of light and shadow and feels, however briefly, that ancient imbalance return, the known behind, the unknown ahead, a small shelter of warmth surrounded by distance. Then somewhere, eventually, the sky begins to pale, shapes return, the long night loosens its grip, the world becomes readable once again. But the lesson remains, quiet and enduring, like the last ember in a dying fire that for all our brightness, all our walls, all our explanations, some part of us still belongs to the species that learned to survive by respecting the dark.